Welcome to another presentation. Today we're going to be talking about one of the critical, most backbone topics of Ayurveda, and this is Richacharya, or the seasonal regimes, the seasonal approaches and layouts to Ayurveda, which, despite being one of the most fundamental, basic foundations of, implementing anything within this system, is also one of the most often misunderstood or mistaught, mistapped into part of how it's been being presented a lot in the modern world, particularly in the West, not so much in India all the time. But we're going to get into some of the reasons for that, and even some of the people in the West who are turning on to the classical texts and whatnot are still there's still not a lot of in-depth work with this, and speaks to a lot more attention being needed in this area at local variations, which I'm not seeing anywhere, unfortunately. But we'll go through this and hopefully get you a good introduction to the topic and some things to think about as you go through seasonal regimes and looking at all these workshops available out there and whatnot. So the first thing we want to look at is understand there's fundamental causes of disease. And Ayurveda lays out a lot of different models and approaches to causes of disease, but one of these threefold natures is given here, which includes prajna prada, satmendriyartha samyoga, and kala, which is what we're going to focus on here, which is time. And there's lots of different avenues about how time generates disease and affects us, but here we're talking about time as these seasonal changes and what that does in the environment, the body, to create health or disease, depending on how we work it. And all these diseases can be from this life, past life, or both can play an impact. A lot of times people come with problems, and they try all sorts of things. They see practitioners, doctors, specialists, but a lot of times there are Ayurveda recognizes karmic diseases, and to pick up on these you need some Jyotish background, which is why that's an indispensable tool for Ayurvedic practitioners, particularly if you're having stubborn diseases that don't seem to respond to anything. So that's one reason why Jyotish has been a very important tool in the Ayurvedic canon. And then, within this life too, you can see, especially with the Jyotish chart, you can see if it's chronic, if it's, going to be just acute, if it'll pass, what are the causes, what are the transits and whatnot, as far as what's bringing us up, as far as helping to get to the root cause of what's really causing it. And so, Ayurjyotish is a whole lifetime of study in and of itself, but just a little background that the depth of Ayurveda diagnosing disease is pretty vast. But for now, we're just going to focus on these cyclical changes in the seasons that are really foundational and important. So in order to understand this just a little bit, just a brief mention here on the Zodiacs. There is a sidereal zodiac, which has to do with visual stellar positions in the actual sky, as well as the tropical zodiac, which has to do with the movement of the sun. And there's a lot of debates on this as far as like how to use it in astrological portions, but if we do look at some of the original designations of the Rashis, especially in the Vedic system, and there's a lot of scholars who think it came from the Greeks, and this is just very poor scholarship, because there's been a lot of interchange between these cultures thousands and thousands of years. So while definitely the nakshatra based systems are kind of the core of all the ancient worlds, to say that the Rashis came from the Greeks is a little unfounded and uncritical. But nonetheless, even though we do see within the Vedic texts that the original Rashis had a lot to do with what are called adityas, or different manifestations of the sun in these different signs, or I mean, the sun's helping create the signs, but I don't want to get too into the Jyotish here. But they have a lot of connotations with the seasons. However, these seasons only hold for the different hemispheres. So, while it's winter up here, it's summer in the southern hemisphere, for example. So even a seasonally based tropical zodiac can't really be used for astrology, especially in the Eastern system, because it's those signs only hold true, so to speak, for only one half of the world. So we place those into the most of the ancient calculations. We take that and you use that to figure out the sidereal positions of the stars, which represents that higher truth, that higher order, which is used for predicting human lives and karma and deeper aspects of the human being. But while the tropical zodiac is going to be seen for weather patterns and changes and things like this that we're looking at for Ayurveda. And it's also important to keep a note too that what I'm presenting here will be flipped for the southern hemisphere. So this is another important point to bring out, just to touch on the zodiacs here, which we talk about a little in our Jyotish lessons, and I'll hopefully look at this in a deeper manner sometime soon, as well as just a general video. But just a basic introduction there. The seasons are really formed by this movement of the sun, and this distinction between the sun and the moon are really the basis of all the Vedic knowledge. It all kind of stems out of this, and I've talked about this a little bit in our introductory videos, so you can see that if you want. But whether we're talking Hatha Yoga, Ayurveda, Jyotish, this dynamic of the sun and the moon is the basis of it. So within the seasonal basis, this has to do with the Uttarayana and the Dakshinayana. We see that the time period from winter solstice to summer solstice is a time that's considered to be dominated by the sun. And it's during this time that the sun increases in strength. And as the sun increases, so do the hot, the sharp, the dry qualities, as well as the pungent, bitter, and astringent tastes. They're considered to be on the increase in general during this time, as if we want to just look at the big picture of how the seasonal regimes are happening. And then after that, the sun slowly decreases in its power. The days get longer, and more moisture can return to the earth. And so it's during this time that it's seen, ancient texts talk about it as a moon dominant time. It's a time where it's more cold, moist, soft, and then the sweet, sour, and salty tastes also increase. So and how we use these tastes and qualities, it all gets a little more specific as we break down the seasons. Okay, so and we'll talk about some of those details. But in general, we can see this waxing and kind of waning. And these cycles hold true no matter where you are in the hemisphere that you reside. So, and remember, once again, to flip for the southern hemisphere, which I won't keep reminding you. Just remember that. I'm just going to talk based on the northern hemisphere here. But it's important to recognize that these broad atmospheric strokes are true for the whole northern hemisphere as the seasons change, and they're going to have an effect. And they also have an effect on how, as we subdivide, we'll get into, there's actually 6 seasons that the Vedics have subdivided into. It still has an effect on that level too. So you're going to see a lot of modern, especially in the West, people kind of adapting this in a 4-season model or 3-season model, which does have some basis in the Vedic text, but it's not they try to broaden it out too much into whole hemispheres or the whole temperate climate and a lot of these things, which really doesn't hold true. So, they base it on more of these kind of local weather patterns when they're not looking at climactic and atmospheric changes that are happening, which are causing the changes in the gunas and the elements. So I really recommend understanding this Vedic model and the 6 seasons as your starting point before you start adapting to some of these, newfangled models, or, no matter how logical they may seem, because it still takes a lot of attention to see what's going on here. So moving a little deeper into this, we need to understand, in order to understand the movement of the gunas, how it's creating disease or health, so to speak, we need to understand the general pathological manifestation as it's outlined in Ayurveda. So we understand that the doshas undergo different cycles in how they create disease, and it's called samprapti. And the first stage of this is sanchaya, which is considered an accumulating stage. So Kapha, Pitta, dosha has certain qualities that aggravate each of them, and as these qualities build, they start accumulating, and then a certain quality will aggravate that. And these first 2 stages, they happen naturally within the patterns of the seasonal cycles. These are natural movement of the doshas, and so these natural movements I've given here. So with Vata, it increases with dryness, which is most predominant in the summertime. It aggravates with cool, which happens, more in the late summer, and then it gets pacified with heat, which is seen to come more in autumn and these Indian summer kind of things, which actually happen in a lot of environments, even in North America. Then Pitta increases with moisture. So Pitta is, fire, it has some water, so it needs some moisture to start to aggravate it. In the summer, it's so dry, Pitta can't really manifest fully. So there's a lot of weird things you hear out there. But either way, so Pitta increases with moisture, right? It aggravates with heat, and then it pacifies with cool. And you'll see how this plays out in the seasonal cycles in the next slide. And then Kapha increases with cold, aggravates with heat, and pacifies with dryness. So Kapha is the one dosha that is pretty standard in a lot of these, in almost any model you'll see. So this is also why maybe certain practitioners might be using a faulty model, yet they still might be getting some results with even just using this one, and it might bear out for some time until a lot of the other details fall out of place, which might take some years depending on how you're working with Ayurveda. But nonetheless, so ideally, healthy people, you take care of these aggravations of the doshas as they arise within the season and as they manifest, and you don't allow them to go on to the next stage of prasara, stanya samshraya, vyakti, and beda. These later stages where it starts spreading in the body, it finds a place in your body where it might be a weak tissue or something like that, and then the disease starts to manifest, and then the end stage is when we give it a name. So all those later stages hopefully don't come if you're following the seasonal regimes. Okay, so as long as you're following the seasonal regimes, these later stages ideally shouldn't come. And because of this reason, Ayurveda recommends a daily and seasonal regime as the base, and it doesn't recommend any specific protocols for Vata, Pitta, or Kapha as like a general protocol whatsoever, as you see a lot of times these days. There's no such thing in classical Ayurveda. The only time you're going to start taking Vata, Pitta, Kapha into consideration on a more detailed, specific level for an individual is when they have disease manifestations or spreading of the doshas around the body. So, when you see people say, "Oh, if you're a Pitta eat this diet, if do this, buy this product. This is sales, it's marketing, it's easily digestible information around the seasonal, or around the doshas. It's this kind of identity culture we tend to live in. So now, with that being said, most of us are out of balance and do have some manifestation of the doshas, and have at least some spreading or relocation of them on some level, especially the older we get. However, to understand, how it's manifesting, what's the real root of it, how the doshas are pushing each other in different directions, how the elements are manifesting, all these other things I've talked in other lectures, requires a little more detailed study than merely eating a diet for a specific dosha. So, best thing to do is, always work with a practitioner, but understand these basics of these seasonal patterns as they manifest naturally, and following those seasonal patterns with some slight modifications to, whatever dosha imbalances you might have, in conjunction, hopefully, with a physician, is the best approach. But if you don't know, and if you're not that out of balance, then, honestly, sticking with a daily and seasonal regime according to, these principles, and understanding the shifts for your local environment is going to be the best thing. So, which eventually necessitates avoiding a lot of the information that's out there. But anyway, so this is a basic overview of how the disease process comes about. Now, if we see this and map this onto the seasonal shifts, this is what's most of the classics give, but particularly Charak, which is, the standard text. And, and Charak is the oldest text we have. And you find that as you get deeper through time, you get more and more all sorts of opinions up until nowadays, and a lot of knowledge is lost. So I would always recommend going back to Charak as your kind of base understanding. He really, the detail laid out in Charak Samhita is the foundation. So we see here that Vata increases in summer due to this dryness, and then it gets aggravated in late summer when the sun shifts. Some of the cooler winds start happening. And then there's a decrease, and this is also when some of the rains come, and then there's a decrease in autumn when it gets hotter in India. And so in India, you're going to see these shifts happen in a much more drastic fashion. But that doesn't mean that these shifts aren't happening in other places. And you have to pay attention to them and see, there is some modification for local variations, but you still have to see how they're happening. So, for example, where I live in Northern California, this model fits quite perfectly. There definitely is a complete dryness in the summer. The hills get scorched, they dry out, and then right around late summer, you can notice right around when the sun starts shifting at the summer solstice, there's winds start picking up. It does cool off quite a bit. There's not monsoons, but moisture starts to return in the atmosphere. Clouds start coming back. It's a mild environment we live in, so it's not going to be a monsoon, but there's still a shift. And then in autumn, we get an Indian summer. It's usually the hottest time of the year here. And I live in the Bay Area, and even here we have microclimates. But in general, this happens on a pattern. So, so it's just something to see how it plays out in your own locale. And once again, it's not intense. It's not, but it's still there. And because it's not intense, then our diets can shift a little more. So we don't have to change the diet as drastically as some other climates, such as if you're living in Chicago, for example, where in the winters you need to eat a heavy diet in order to build up your body enough to make it through those winters. Whereas here, that shift in heavy light diet and so forth through the seasons won't be as much. So just some general ideas to see how this is working. With Pitta, once again, we see late summer as the clouds form, or if it's a monsoon, that increase comes with the increased moisture. It allows Pitta to accumulate. In autumn, when that kind of moves away and there's a little more heat, it gets aggravated, and it decreases in winter with the cool, which follows the path of the gunas of Pitta and how it increases and decreases. And then Kapha increases in late winter, aggravates in spring when we see the heat come up, and summer, once again, the dryness, the heat, it pacifies Kapha. Couple things to notice here in this model. Nothing gets aggravated in the summer. Even though some things are increasing and decreasing, there's still quite a bit of Kapha left from the spring season, which protects the body some from anything going really awry, unless you're taking a lot of bitter herbs because you think Pitta's out of balance in the summer, or something of this nature, or any number of things you might be doing. So ideally, nothing gets aggravated if you're following this regime properly, and a good Kapha has been built up over the winter. You still have a strong body to make it through this period. Also, nothing's accumulating in spring. We just get that release of the Kapha. And a big one here is nothing gets aggravated in the winter. And this is a really important point, and a dangerous point too with some of the information I see out there, is this winter is the time when our body is the strongest. And this happens because the cool nature of the weather outside kind of closes the pore, and so the heat of the body is kind of trapped inside, and it turns more central, and so it kicks up the digestive fire within the body. And with the digestive fire kicked up, we need to eat more. We need to eat a bigger diet. We need to heavier diet, oilier diet, as long as you can digest it, and all this gets modified per your digestive capacities. But if you don't feed that fire, then the body depletes, and the classics talk about this. The body dries out, and Vata will get disturbed in the winter because of that if you don't feed the fire. So a lot of people, especially in modern Ayurveda, are saying Vata gets disturbed in like fall, winter, this to that. Or even Kapha gets disturbed in winter, but it's not really true. Nothing is. As long as you're, understanding the regimes and adjusting appropriately, winter is the time to build the body. But if you're, if you've in some popularly written books, if you're following anti-Kapha diet, then you're gonna decrease the body. You're gonna kill your immunity, and at a time when you need to build the body for the strength it needs to get through the summer and the depleting time of the year. So really important details to look at, and it all gets modified, specific to locale and personal proclivities. But this is, get comfortable with this basic pattern here, and you can watch for how it plays out. Now, in order to start looking at the details, and I've already talked a lot about this slide, but late winter here is roughly November to January, and then January to March. And these time periods, they're going to shift a few weeks, usually, depending on where you're at in the world. So these aren't staid facts. They have to be used intelligently, and that's why Ayurveda requires, some attention, and you can't just follow lists or basic protocols without paying attention to what's actually happening in the environment on a day-to-day basis. And this also requires practitioners to apply this knowledge to their own local environment and understand how it plays out in their own local environment. And another thing to know too on these dates is, classically, January 15th or January 14th is usually seen as Makara Sankranti, which is they consider when the sun starts moving, in its northern pass, when it starts to get stronger and stronger. So when the solstice actually happens in December, in the middle of December, which is really when the sun and the season starts shifting in that way. But this has a lot to do with the tropical and sidereal zodiac and how they've become separated over the time. And so what's really a seasonal celebration, Makara Sankranti, is getting shifted into January, and ideally should be shifted back. So there's this whole debate about where to place the festivals and what it means, but there's different uses. There are seasonal festivals that are going to have to be adjusted as the zodiacs split apart over time. But then there are spiritual, religious festivals that still would fall in line with the sidereal zodiac. So once again, part of that bigger debate, but just something to note if you're wondering why these dates are, a little off of the solstices. And once again, always modified to your local environment. So just looking through the list, and it just gives some basic details here that I've already talked about. And so I won't get into it too much, but I've given some general indications. And so those of you who are on the website can download the slides and, use some of these for more of the details. So moving on from winter to spring, we see spring roughly, mid-March to mid-May, just a couple months. And, this is when Kapha liquefies after, the heat comes. And so cold mucus comes. So it's at this time that really bitter, astringent, pungent foods are favored. Not so much in the summer, which we're going to get into. The digestive strength is still somewhat moderate, but you still need to eat lighter foods. And so I didn't mention this in the winter slide, but you kind of carry the same regimens in early and late winter. However, in later winter, since that drying starting to happen as the sun moves, and you have to start modifying. So you need a little bit of a lighter meal in the later winter, and just watch out for the dryness accumulating, particularly in later winter slowly. But once again, in spring here, definitely less moisture in spring, lighter foods. Honey's great in this time. One note on honey: never warm it. Even hot water with honey still creates a poison, according to Ayurvedic texts. So I've seen a lot of Ayurvedic blogs. Oh, put honey in your tea. It's still Ayurvedic no. It's not just boiling. Okay, so any heated honey, basically. So so lots. Greens can be good. Ideally, greens with a bite. Like spinach, arugula, if it's from a proper garden, which is still bitter. A lot of modern day foods are kind of bred to be a little sweeter or tasteless for that matter. So all these kind of things are better at this time. And once again, you can look at these slides in more detail as you need. In summertime, we look at early summer as May 15th, July 15th. So, a lot of people say the summer starts at the summer solstice, but really that's when summer starts becoming over because the sun starts declining after summer solstice. So we see in early summer, this Vata is increasing and is starting to dry and deplete the body at this time. So because of this, you really want to emphasize sweet and cool items. So I realize it is hot in the summer, and Pitta can get aggravated if you have Pitta disturbances in you. And nowadays, a lot of us do, just based on our diets and overly caffeinating ourselves, and even eating a lot of wheat or sugar, and a lot of things that might build up some acidity and toxicity in the body. If you have a Pitta imbalance, the heat can bring it out. But if you don't, then there's no point to consider just heat as indicative of increasing Pitta. So you want to be careful there with taking the standard advice of bitters and astringents to take care of your pitta problems in the summer. So body digestion keeps getting weaker here, so you might notice your appetite decreasing and going lower here. And once again, this also goes into questioning the basic ideas that people think, oh, well, when the sun's high in the middle of the day, it's hot, and so pitta's strong, and my digestion must be strong, so I need to eat a big lunch. And that doesn't really play out when we, that might play out some in the daily cycles, but in the seasonal cycles, here when the sun's, directly overhead at its hottest time of year, at the hottest time of the day, your body's depleting and your digestion is low. So you want to be careful with eating big lunches in the middle of the day during the summertime. So you really have to pay attention to what your body's needing and wanting. Most of the things recommended here, sweet, lighter to digest, a watery kind of foods, lots of fruits, things like that, which are the best for both Vata and Pitta. So it will help with both. And and once again, depending on your locale, Pitta might show itself a little more, but still you have to watch out for Vata at this time, because your body, no matter where you are, is going to be taxed more. Definitely. Okay, it's not a question. Light clothing, all the rest of it. And then we get to Varsha, or late summer, where the rains are coming. And once again, this is when, the clouds start forming. Moisture starts returning to the earth as the sun starts lowering. The days are getting shorter. All this stuff starts to return. So this is a time to favor more sour and salty foods. It's important to note this is when body and digestion are most greatly disturbed, because the body's been so weakened from the hotter weather, and with this shift in temperature, with this cooler kind of shift coming, it kicks up all sorts of problems. And particularly if you do live in some place like India with the monsoons, basically all the doshas can get aggravated at this time. And, this is largely due to increased humidity. And once again, even if you don't live in a monsoon season, I've seen this happen even here with these slight shifts. Weird bugs start popping up at this time in people. They start getting nauseous. Like there's things that come up, and it's a little more subtle, but it's still there if you watch out for it. So here, just minimal exercise still, because the body's so weak. Avoid really heavy foods. Any fruits, once again, so we're starting to get more moisture. Any sleeping, so you can read the slides once again. And then we move on to Sharad, which is called autumn, and this is generally when the moistures abide, and we have a slight reprieve of the sun, a little more heated. The temperatures might rise up a little bit more. And once again, this is predominant in India and some other locations, such as where I'm at. But even where I was from in Chicago, we would often have these Indian summers for a few weeks here and there. These patterns happen. You have to watch for your local variations. And it's during this time that's, Pitta is classically considered to be going into some aggravation here. Our strength is building here, our Agni, our digestive power is building here, but you still want to eat in moderation, depending on who you are. Given all the foods here to increase, you still want sweet, light, cold. And here's a good time to take some bitters, okay? This would be a good time for bitters, since the body, and there's still some moisture in the atmosphere. So that bitter quality can help clear the pitta, and you still have enough building and enough strength to take on, a bitter herb, which can be quite drying and taxing to the body quite often. You can start working out more, eating a little heavier meals, all these things start coming. And then after that, we, move into winter, late winter, and everything else that we had already discussed. So those are the general patterns, and, that'll give you a good idea to start with. And I just recommend starting to just get that basic framework and start looking at it and observing it over a year. And this takes some years to really, understand the shifts for your local environment and appreciate what's going on. But you can do this. And here we look at a way to look at local variation. So after you look at it with the base patterns for, a good year, and it takes time because it's just that's how it goes. But you can start looking at some of the local variations by paying attention to these specific gunas and how they might be manifesting to the variations. And you look for hints of these seasons coming. So when are clouds forming? When are rains really coming? Flowers blooming, and so on and so forth. And so and these will show you general indications of the patterns for your own location, but also oftentimes too, especially with the weird weather patterns we've been having in the world lately, there can be doshas of the season. When winter extends through springtime and you haven't had a proper spring and it thaws out, which creates all sorts of other issues and complicates the matter. But then you have to adjust your regimes accordingly based on the season that you're entering and taking that into account, which is a little more complicated, but that can happen and important to recognize. And so as a general guideline, you can see if the days are hot and the nights are also hot, then generally there's a summer gunas are into effect, and those kind of routines can be used regardless. If the days are hot and the nights are cooler, it's more of a springtime guna. And then if the cold day, cold night is more of a winter thing, cold all the time. If there is some moisture, you're getting more of the rainy seasons. And if the rains are coming and going, it's not so much of a steady increase, then we're looking at autumn, where there's some of that heat forming too. So you can look at the basic gunas of each of those seasons in order to modify for what they might be adding to your local variation, and you can come up with a combined kind of seasonal regime that takes into account both of those balances, or using this in the event that there is a dosha of the season and the seasons are off depending on the climatic variations. And then along with that, we always have to, Ayurveda always goes back to the individual, but looking at personal variations and how that plays out, because there's a season in the body as well. So in general, you can modify your regime. So, before those basic regimes I gave were, good for those seasons in relatively healthy people. But if you do have some grosser disorders, then you definitely have to modify that based on the season. And certain seasons are going to be better for certain disorders. So, if you have a Pitta disorder in the classical fold during the Pitta time of year in autumn, it's going to be harder to clear that Pitta problem, but it's going to be a lot easier to clear it, during the winter time when Pitta kind of decreases, and so, or if you have a Vata disorder, it's going to be a lot harder to clear that in the summertime, but a lot easier to clear it later on when Vata goes into decline. So, like this, the seasonal regimes can be used to help to know when to really start taking care of your body to avoid further problems, or when you can let go a little. But it also plays into the application of, panchakarma regimes and so on and so forth, which is a topic for another time. You have to get this, understand these basic patterns down before you understand the cleansing regimes and how to use those properly. But here, I've given, once again, some general indications for your personal disorders. A Sema regime can be good in general for, Vata Pitta more disorder. So you can use some of those regimes in other time periods if you have those disorders. So spring regime for Kapha disorders. So, in wintertime, even though you're supposed to be eating really heavily, for example, you can still take that spring regime and use it in the winter if you have a heavy Kapha disorder, because your Agni is going to be a lot stronger to, burn up that excess Kapha and the problems you're having. So at times you can do an anti-Kapha diet in the winter if you have excess Kapha. If you don't, then it's pointless. But it has to be used wisely and judiciously. So, and then the autumn regime can be used for Kapha Pitta disorders, because there's still a lot of moisture at that time, and a lot of the regimes for autumn are to clear that as well, along with the Pitta in the body. So, and then for Vata, Vata is, kind of a carrier of the doshas. So oftentimes Vata is always implicated in some level, with anything moving through the body. So, and I've talked about this at length in other videos. All of our Vata is deranged in general. Like, you can pretty much assume that in our modern age for a lot of people. So, Vata is kind of a general care-all you can take care of at any time. But if you are dealing with the those dryness aspects and everything, then you can use some of the summer regimes as a general starting line to deal with that kind of aspect. And once again, all this does get a little further modified. So these are just general kind of broad brushstrokes that you can start to work with. And you also need to take into account always, your digestive strength. So can you handle the substances you're putting into your body to digest and make a body? Do you have ama? If you have ama or toxicity, that needs to get cleared before you do any building regimes, for example, like this. So, these other details to take into account, which we'll look at too more in pathology and diagnostics. But for the time being, start to see how this stuff's informing your body and your system over time. And once again, we see that the basics: always eat according to your digestive capacity, focus more on the seasonal variations and transitions overall. Before you start getting into, all this other deeper stuff, unless it's with the physician, take into account personal Vikruti once again, and always observe, reflect, and refine. So don't get stuck in a mold. And this is the biggest point and biggest take home from this lesson. Don't get stuck on a list. Don't get stuck eating the same foods year after year, which is easy in this day and age where we go to the store. And I totally sympathize, and I can fall into those routines quite easily as well. But look, and keep refining your diet over the years, seeing, and that's the thing too, is your body's going to shift as you clear out things, and you live more in tune with these seasons, and you're gonna need different things. So like, as your Agni increases and becomes more efficient, you're actually gonna need less food. So a lot of times people think, oh, I've got a great Agni, I can eat a lot. But actually, when you have a good Agni and your prana's balanced, you actually don't need that much food. Your body makes the most with what it's got. So there's shifts that happen too as you live more healthy. You can sense when you're doing unhealthy things more acutely. So sometimes people will start eating healthy and they'll actually start feeling worse because they feel just what they've done to their body. For example. So, there's a lot of shifts that happen with all this stuff. So you have to, constantly be aware and refine over time. And, if you have questions, feel free to ask me. You can throw some things up, send me a note or whatever, to see what, you think. And particularly too with, how these weather patterns are working in your local environment. This is one of my this is one of the things that I really am interested in the most and researching the most, just because it's so central, but it hasn't really been studied properly or like clinically in many, many different regions throughout, particularly the Western world. So which is needed to be done to really properly do Ayurveda. And it's kind of alarming that a lot of practitioners, and I've asked lots of practitioners about this and their observations and reflections, but they don't have anything. A lot of people are just, reading books, following their teachers, and not, doing a lot of research or anything. There's a couple people that are starting to do some things, but it's still pretty young. So, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on, how you think this stuff's playing out in your environment and what you're seeing as far as the shifts, and be interesting to get, like a map of different regions and zones and how different geographical markers can influence gunas and everything like that. And then, lots of work still to be done, but just some ideas moving forward. So that's the basics on these seasonal regimes. And we'll look a little more at some of this as we move on. But I hope this has been helpful, and have a good one.